That's all it took to sever a lifetime of trying to belong. Don't bother coming to the family meeting anymore. We're cutting ties. My father's voice was flat, clinical, like he was canceling a magazine subscription. I stood in my San Francisco apartment, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the pain to come. But it didn't. Just an old, familiar emptiness that had been my companion for so long I'd stopped noticing it. I should have felt something. Anger, maybe. Grief. But all I felt was the weight of finally hearing what I'd always known. I was never really part of the family. I was a tool, a means to an end. And now that they were done with me, I was being discarded with the same thoughtlessness you'd use to throw away a broken wrench. My fingers moved mechanically as I typed a response. Understood. 2 syllables, no emotion, no plea for reconsideration, just acknowledgement. I hit send and stared at the screen for a long moment, watching those 3 dots appear and disappear as my father perhaps waited for me to beg, to ask what I'd done wrong, to try to fix whatever imaginary transgression had led to this moment. The dots vanished. No reply came. I set the phone down and walked to my desk, opening my laptop with steady hands. The banking portal loaded slowly, each second stretching like taffy. When the login screen appeared, I entered the credentials I'd kept filed away in my mind for 2 years, the ones I'd created when I'd co-signed that $5 million loan for Hayes Auto Group's headquarters expansion. The account summary appeared. There it was, in cold black numbers, $5 million. Outstanding balance, $4,847,293.12. My name, Scarlett Hayes, listed as cosigner with full administrative access. I clicked through the menus with the precision of the software engineer I was, finding the document management section. My withdrawal letter had been drafted 6 months ago, updated monthly, kept in a locked folder on my encrypted drive. I'd known this day would come. Maybe not exactly like this, but some version of it. The only question had been when. Upload document, select file, enter PIN, confirm removal of cosigner status. My finger hovered over the final button. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was clarity. A brutal, crystalline clarity that cut through all the years of hoping, trying, proving, failing to earn something that should have been freely given. I clicked submit. The screen refreshed. A small gray line appeared at the bottom. Update received. Processing pending compliance review. No alarms. No dramatic music. No thundercrack to mark the moment everything changed. Just a quiet update in a banking system's database. The first domino, falling in perfect silence. I sat back in my chair and allowed myself one long breath. Then I picked up my phone again and began typing an email to Keith Harrington, the bank's loan manager. The subject line was simple. Concerns regarding Hayes Auto Group loan, supporting documentation attached. The body of the email was even simpler. Factual. Unemotional. A bullet point list of discrepancies I'd discovered over the past 18 months. Fraudulent vendor invoices, altered signatures, restricted access to company systems, credit utilization without my knowledge or consent. Each point was backed by documentation from the encrypted folder I'd been building, the one I'd named Dark Ledger and had recently renamed Revenge Blueprint. I attached 15 PDF files, each one carefully redacted to show only what was necessary, each one damning in its own quiet way. Send. The email whooshed away into the digital void, carrying with it the structural integrity of my father's empire. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline, at the city that had become my refuge when I'd left Detroit 5 years ago. When I'd finally admitted to myself that a Harvard MBA and a perfect credit score would never be enough to earn a place at the table I'd been setting my whole life. The city lights blurred slightly, and I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from release. I thought about calling someone. Marcus Thorne, my lawyer friend, maybe. But he already knew what I'd planned. We'd gone over every legal angle 3 times. You're not a guarantor. He'd said over coffee at a quiet cafe near the courthouse last month, my evidence spread across the table between us. They used your name to secure the loan, but you're not legally bound if you withdraw before restructuring. They were counting on you never knowing enough to pull the plug. I thought about the years before this moment. About being 8 years old, sitting on a metal stool in the warehouse bay of my father's original garage in suburban Detroit, learning to read balance sheets instead of picture books. About being 12 and having to explain profit margins to my mother's friends at her birthday party because my father thought it was cute, his little numbers girl. About being 17 and watching my brother Brandon get the car I'd been promised for my own birthday because boys need transportation more. I thought about Harvard, about graduating top of my MBA class and coming home expecting recognition, expecting a real position in the company, only to find that my corner office had been given to Brandon's college roommate, some marketing bro who'd never managed anything more complex than his fantasy football league. I'd been given a cubicle and told I'd work my way up. I worked my way up. I streamlined the supply chain, cutting costs by 18%. I negotiated better terms with 3 major vendors. I identified and plugged a leak in the payroll system that had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years, and for every success, Brandon took credit in the board meetings I wasn't invited to attend. Then came the loan. 2 years ago, almost to the day. The company needed capital for expansion, and the bank wanted a co-signer with immaculate credit. Brandon was drowning in gambling debts he thought no one knew about. My father had assets but refused to put them at risk. My mother's trust fund was untouchable by design. That left me. Perfect credit score, Harvard MBA, family member with skin in the game. The ideal candidate. I'd signed because I'd believed, with a naivety that now seemed laughable, that loyalty would finally buy me belonging, that this would be the thing that proved I was worthy. That sacrificing my financial security for the family business would finally make me family. Instead, within 6 months, they'd started cutting me out. First, my access to the internal financial systems was restricted, restructuring the permissions, they'd said. Then my corporate credit card was canceled without replacement. Temporary system change, they'd explained. Meanwhile, Brandon got a new corner office with a view, a company car that cost more than my annual salary, and an expense account that funded weekly leadership conferences in Vegas. I'd started documenting everything then, every email where Brandon had forged my signature, every invoice that had been inflated and kicked back to his friends, every financial irregularity that bore my name but not my knowledge. I'd built my case like I was preparing for trial, because some part of me had known I'd need it. 3 months ago, my monthly credit report had arrived, and I'd nearly dropped my coffee. Hayes Holdings. Payment delay under review. Hayes Holdings was a shell company my father had set up years ago, supposedly defunct. But there it was, active and linked to my credit profile. I'd dug deeper. The $5 million loan I'd co-signed was 3 months past due. The company was using my pristine credit history to negotiate extensions while funneling money to God knows where. Tens of thousands in consulting fees to Brandon's poker buddies, vehicle repair costs inflated by 300% with my forged signature authorizing payment. This wasn't mismanagement. This was systematic fraud. That's when I'd gone to Marcus. That's when I'd learned I could get out. That's when I'd started planning. And now, my phone was exploding. 17 missed calls in 20 minutes. My father, my mother, Brandon, Gordon Maddox, the company's ancient accountant who'd been with my grandfather since the beginning. I watched the notifications pile up, each one a small victory. The phone rang again. Gordon. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Scarlett. His voice was panicked, higher pitched than I'd ever heard it. You need to call me back immediately. This is serious. The loan is collapsing. The bank has withdrawn support. We're facing default. You have to fix this. I hung up without responding. The phone rang again. My mother this time. Against my better judgment, I answered. Scarlett, what have you done? Eleanor's voice was breathy, shocked. I withdrew my name from the loan, Mom. That's all. But you can't do that. Actually, I can, and I did. Scarlett, this affects all of us. I felt something cold settle in my chest. No, Mom. You made sure it wouldn't affect you. Your trust fund is protected. Your assets are separate. You've been insulated from Dad's business decisions our entire lives. This only affects the people who used me. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Was it fair when you watched him give my office to Brandon's friend and said nothing? Was it fair when my corporate card was canceled and you told me not to make waves? Was it fair when they forged my signature and you looked the other way? Silence. I'm done being fair, Mom. I'm done being quiet. I'm done being useful. Scarlett, please. I ended the call, not because I was angry, though I was, but because I felt complete. For the first time in my life, I'd said what needed to be said and not apologized for it. The calls kept coming. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine, standing at my window and watching the city lights blur into watercolor streaks. Within an hour, my laptop pinged with an email notification. Keith Harrington, responding to my message. Miss Hayes, thank you for bringing these concerns to our attention. We are immediately freezing all operating accounts associated with Hayes Holdings, pending an internal review. A compliance team will be in contact within 48 hours. Given the serious nature of these allegations, we are also suspending the current loan restructuring negotiations. I read it 3 times, feeling each word settle like a stone in still water. They'd done it. They'd actually frozen the accounts. Without that operating capital, Hayes Auto Group couldn't make payroll, couldn't pay vendors, couldn't function. The empire my grandfather had built, that my father had expanded, that Brandon was supposed to inherit, was grinding to a halt. And it was my doing. I should have felt guilty. That's what they'd trained me to feel, after all. Guilty for taking up space, guilty for having needs, guilty for expecting basic respect and recognition. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. My phone, even powered off, seemed to vibrate with the weight of unanswered calls. I knew what was coming next. I'd seen this play before. First shock, then anger, then blame, then the demand that I fix it, as if I'd broken something instead of simply stopping my participation in breaking myself. I spent the evening reviewing my own finances, making sure everything was secure. My savings account, separate from any family connection. My retirement fund, in my name only. My credit score, which would actually improve once the loan was fully removed from my record. I'd been careful, more careful than they'd ever given me credit for. The next morning, I woke to an email from my father. No greeting, no signature, just a single line. Family meeting, Leona's, tonight, 7 p.m. Leona's, the restaurant where we'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, business victories. The last time I'd been there was for my 30th birthday, where my father had toasted Brandon's promotion and forgotten to mention me until my mother had quietly reminded him. I shouldn't go. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to let them stew in the consequences of their choices. But another part of me, the part that had been building this moment for months, wanted to see their faces. Wanted to finish what I'd started. I sent a brief reply. I'll be there. I spent the day at my desk, working on a new project for a startup founded by 2 women who'd escaped their own toxic family business. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was good at my work, better than I'd ever been at Hayes Auto Group, because here I wasn't fighting for recognition. I was simply doing what I was good at and being valued for it. At 6:45 p.m., I dressed carefully. A gray pantsuit, professional but not conciliatory, hair pulled back in a simple style, minimal makeup. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked calm, certain, free. I arrived at Leona's at 7:15, deliberately late. They were already seated at our usual table in the back, the one with the leather booth and the view of the kitchen. My father and mother sat rigid, Brandon's eyes glued to his phone. None of them looked up when I approached. I slid into the booth across from them, my movements unhurried. The waiter appeared immediately, but my father waved him away. "You've made your point," Richard said, his voice tight. "Have I?" I folded my hands on the table. "What point would that be?" "Don't play games, Scarlett. You've damaged the company. You've jeopardized everything our family has built. Grandfather built a garage. You turned it into a dictatorship. I'm not sure those are the same thing." My father's jaw clenched. "We gave you every opportunity. You gave me work, not a voice. There's a difference." Brandon finally looked up from his phone, a sneer crossing his face. "Come on, Scarlett. We gave you everything. A job, a salary, a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. You gave me a job you could have given to anyone. You gave me a salary you cut whenever it was convenient. And you gave me the chance to watch you take credit for my work while you gambled away your inheritance." His face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about. $73,000 to offshore betting sites last year alone. But sure, I don't know anything." The table fell silent. Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "What do you want, Scarlett?" she asked quietly. I pulled an envelope from my bag, sealed and notarized. I placed it on the table with the same care someone might use to set down a loaded gun. "This is a signed affidavit confirming that I have permanently withdrawn from the company loan, the board of directors, and all business operations. You will never use my name again." Richard's hand moved toward the envelope but didn't touch it, as if it might burn him. "That's it?" he asked. "No, I'm also filing an anonymous tip with the state auditor. Missing funds, unpaid vendors, payroll inconsistencies, everything I found while I still had access. This is your mess now. Completely, legally, Yours. You can't, Brandon started. I already did. The email went out this morning. You have about 48 hours before they start asking questions you won't want to answer. I stood, smoothing my jacket. My mother's eyes were wet, but I couldn't let that touch me. Not now. Scarlett, please. My father's voice cracked on the word, and I realized I'd never heard him say please to me before, not once in 32 years. I stopped, not because I was wavering, but because I wanted to feel this moment fully. The moment when the man who'd never begged for anything begged me to save him from himself. You left a voicemail saying we were done, I said without turning around. I'm just agreeing with you, officially. I walked out of Leona's and didn't look back. The news broke 2 days later in a local business journal. Hayes Auto Group faces financial crisis amid internal disputes. The article was vague on details, citing anonymous sources and pending investigations. I knew who'd leaked it. Marcus had friends in journalism, and I'd given him permission to ensure the story got out. Not for revenge, though that was part of it, but because the employees deserved to know why their paychecks might be late, why the vendors they worked with were pulling contracts, why everything was falling apart. The voicemails continued. My father called me an ungrateful daughter. Brandon threatened me, said I'd need them someday, that I was burning bridges I'd regret losing. Gordon Maddox left a rambling message about how I'd destroyed their legacy. But they'd destroyed that legacy long before I left. They destroyed it when they used my name but denied me a seat. When they decided I was a threat instead of a daughter. When they made me invisible while depending on my visibility to banks and creditors. I changed my phone number. I updated my address with every institution that mattered. I made sure there was no thread they could pull to unravel the new life I was building. 3 weeks later, I received a call from the bank's compliance department. They'd completed their review. The fraud was extensive and well documented, thanks to my files. The loan had been restructured, but I was completely removed from any obligation. My credit report would be updated within 30 days to reflect my withdrawal before any missed payments. There would be no financial impact on me whatsoever. Miss Hayes, the compliance officer said, I want you to know that your documentation prevented a much larger fraud from continuing. You likely saved the bank hundreds of thousands in losses. I thanked her and hung up, feeling nothing close to triumph. Just tired, just ready to be done. I started looking for a new place to live. San Francisco had served its purpose, but it was time for something different. I found a small apartment in Portland, in a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and coffee shops on every corner. The apartment had large windows, hardwood floors, and enough space for a desk, a small bookshelf, and the kind of peace I'd never had in my life. I moved on a Tuesday. The movers loaded my few possessions into a truck while I took one last look at the San Francisco skyline. I'd come here to escape Detroit, to build a career separate from my family's shadow. I'd succeeded, but it had cost me everything I'd tried to hold on to from my old life. Now, I was letting go of what remained. Portland welcomed me with rain. I didn't mind. I set up my apartment slowly, deliberately, making each choice for myself and no one else. Where the couch should go, what art to hang on the walls, what dishes to buy. Small decisions that belonged entirely to me. I updated my consulting business cards with my new address. I reached out to my clients, letting them know I'd relocated but would be available remotely. Most were understanding. A few sent congratulations, as if they could sense this was a new beginning. I started taking on new projects, specifically seeking out women-owned businesses and startups. I found myself drawn to their stories, to the ways they'd escaped or overcome their own toxic situations. I helped them set up proper financial controls, establish healthy business structures, avoid the pitfalls I'd experienced. One client, a woman named Jennifer who'd left her family's restaurant business, asked me how I stayed so calm when discussing what had clearly been a traumatic experience. I'm not calm, I told her. I'm clear. There's a difference. Calm suggests nothing bothers me. Clarity means I've processed what happened and decided what it means going forward. She nodded slowly. And what does it mean for you? It means I know my worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see it. It means I don't owe loyalty to people who only valued my usefulness. It means I'm done apologizing for taking up space. 3 months after I'd left San Francisco, a thin envelope arrived at my new address. I almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail, but something made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper on bank letterhead. This letter confirms that the commercial loan associated with Scarlett Hayes has been officially withdrawn and restructured. No further obligations exist. No action required. No thank you. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done or what I'd survived. Just a line drawn in ink, in law, and finally, in truth. I stood in my apartment, holding the letter, and felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. They'd tried to use me, to bind me to their sinking ship, to make my security contingent on their success. And I'd cut the rope. I filed the letter in a folder labeled closed, not finished or over or past, just closed. A door shut, locked, and left behind. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat at my desk with a new client file. The client was a young woman starting a tech company after leaving her father's construction business. Her intake form had a note at the bottom, "I feel like I'm being difficult by asking for what I deserve." I opened a blank document and typed a response that would become the opening line of every initial consultation I'd have from then on. "You're not difficult. You're just finally being seen." I sent the email and sat back, looking around my apartment. The plants I'd bought last week were thriving in the window light. The bookshelf I'd assembled myself held books I'd chosen because I wanted to read them, not because they'd look impressive. The walls were painted a soft gray I'd selected after standing in the paint aisle for 20 minutes, choosing a color for no reason other than I liked it. This was mine. The apartment, the business, the peace, the clarity, all of it built from the rubble of what I'd left behind. I hadn't just escaped, I hadn't just survived. I'd won. Not because I'd hurt them, though the consequences they were facing were their own doing. I'd won because I'd reclaimed something they'd tried to convince me I never had. My own life, lived on my own terms, valued for my own worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the final loan paperwork went through. "How are you feeling?" I typed back, "Free." He responded with a single word, "Good." I set my phone down and looked out the window at the Portland rain, at the city that knew nothing of Hayes Auto Group or family legacies or daughters who were supposed to be grateful for the privilege of being used. I thought about my grandfather, the man who'd built that first garage with his own hands. I wondered what he'd think of what his son had done to his legacy, how he'd twisted something built on hard work and integrity into a machine for exploitation and fraud. Then I thought about what I'd built instead. A business based on helping others avoid the traps I'd fallen into. A life based on self-respect instead of seeking approval. A future where my value wasn't negotiable or conditional. I raised my wineglass to my reflection in the window, to the woman I'd become through fire and betrayal, and the hard-won clarity that comes from finally choosing yourself. To closed doors, I whispered, and to everything that grows in their absence. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, and I turned back to my work, ready for whatever came next, because it would be mine. All of it. The successes and the struggles, the triumphs and the setbacks, the quiet moments and the loud victories. Mine. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.